His fingers locked around the lion's mane as 400 pounds of thrashing muscle slid toward the edge, loose rock crumbling beneath them both into a 200-foot drop. The lion's claws raked across his forearm to the bone, but he pulled harder, screaming through clenched teeth, because letting go meant watching the animal die. What happened in the next 48 hours would become Bushveld legend, a story whispered about for decades.
The lion's back leg slipped off the edge first, claws scraping granite, sending a shower of pebbles into 400 feet of empty air. Kevin Richardson had both hands locked around the mane, his boots sliding forward on wet rock, and every muscle in his body screaming that he was about to go over that cliff with a full-grown male lion. What happened in the next 48 hours would become South African legend, a story whispered about for decades across game reserves, wildlife conferences, and late-night campfires from Johannesburg to Nairobi. But let me take you back. Not far. Just enough so you understand how a man ends up gripping a 400-pound predator on the edge of a cliff in a thunderstorm, making a choice that no sane person would ever make. Kevin Richardson ran a wildlife sanctuary about 90 minutes outside Johannesburg. He wasn't a veterinarian, wasn't a zoologist by training. He was a guy who grew up around animals, started working with lions in his early 20s, and developed a bond with big cats that most experts called reckless and a few called miraculous. He could walk into an enclosure with adult male lions. He could lie down next to them. He could wrestle with them. And for years, nothing went wrong. Believe me, that track record made him either the luckiest man in Africa or the most skilled. Maybe both. The lion's name was Tau. Tau was born at the sanctuary 11 years earlier, and Kevin had raised him from a cub no bigger than a house cat. 11 years. That's longer than most marriages last. Kevin had bottle-fed Tau, slept next to him on cold nights, played with him, disciplined him, watched him grow from a wobbly little thing into a beast with a head the size of a beach ball and paws that could break a man's spine with one swipe. Now here's where the trouble starts. The sanctuary sat on a few thousand acres of protected land, and part of that land butted up against the Magaliesberg mountain range. Old mountains, weathered down over billions of years into rolling ridges with sharp cliff faces carved by water and wind. Kevin had been expanding the range for his lions, giving them more territory to roam, more space to behave the way wild lions behave. He'd built new enclosures farther up the slopes, temporary fenced areas where his lions could explore rougher terrain. Tau was the first lion moved to the upper enclosure. The morning it happened started calm. Kevin drove up the service road at dawn with his head ranger, a guy named Marius, who'd worked with him for 6 years. They were doing a routine check, making sure the fence lines were intact, making sure the water troughs were full, making sure Tau hadn't dug under anything or pushed through any weak spots. Standard stuff. They parked the truck. Kevin grabbed his radio and a bottle of water and stepped out. That's when he heard it. Not a roar. Lions roar when they're announcing themselves. This was different. This was a deep, guttural, distressed moan, the kind of sound a lion makes when something is very, very wrong. Kevin's jaw tightened. He looked at Marius. Marius had already grabbed the binoculars. "Get this." Marius scanned the upper ridge and found Tau within seconds. The lion was on a narrow rock shelf about 300 meters up the slope, near the edge of a cliff face that dropped off sharply into a ravine. And Tau wasn't just standing there. He was limping, favoring his front right leg, moving slowly along the shelf, and the shelf was narrowing. Kevin didn't say a word. He started walking, not running. You don't run toward a distressed lion. But he moved with purpose, climbing the slope at a pace that had Marius struggling to keep up. The terrain was loose shale and scrub brush, and the morning rain had made everything slick. Every step was a negotiation with gravity. "Kev, wait," Marius called out. "We should call the vet. We should get a dart gun." Kevin kept walking. "By the time the vet gets here, Tau's off that ledge." And he was right. Here's what nobody tells you about lion behavior on unfamiliar terrain. Lions are grassland animals. They're built for flat ground, open savanna. Their massive bulk and musculature are designed for explosive horizontal sprints, not rock climbing. Put a lion on a narrow mountain ledge, and it's out of its element. Tao had never been on terrain this steep, and now he was hurt, and now he was scared. Kevin reached the base of the cliff face in about 15 minutes. He could see Tao above him, maybe 40 meters up, on a shelf that was getting narrower by the step. The lion had stopped moving. He was pressed against the rock wall, his injured leg held off the ground, his body trembling. 400 feet of open air behind him. "Easy, boy," Kevin called up. His voice was steady, controlled, the voice he'd used with Tao 1,000 times. "Easy. I'm coming." Marius grabbed Kevin's arm. "You cannot climb up there." Kevin pulled his arm free. "Watch me." He started climbing. The rock was wet. His boots slipped twice in the first 10 meters. He dug his fingers into cracks, found footholds, hauled himself up with his arms when his legs couldn't find purchase. No rope, no harness, no safety equipment of any kind. Just a man climbing a wet cliff toward a 400-pound injured predator. I want you to sit with that for a second. Because this is the part where most people would have called in a helicopter, would have waited for tranquilizer darts, would have done literally anything other than free climb a cliff to reach a wounded lion. But Kevin knew something that the protocols and the textbooks didn't account for. He knew Tao. He knew that if Tao panicked, the lion would try to move, and if the lion tried to move on that narrowing ledge with a bad leg, he was going over the edge. And Kevin also knew that Tao wouldn't panic if he could see Kevin coming, if he could hear Kevin's voice, if the one person in the world he trusted was getting closer. So Kevin climbed. 30 meters up, the angle steepened. Kevin's forearms were burning. His fingers were raw. He pressed his chest against the rock and took 3 breaths. Then he looked up and locked eyes with Tao. The lion was watching him, not with aggression, not with fear, with something that anyone who's ever had a dog or a cat or any animal they loved would recognize instantly. Recognition. Relief. Tao knew who was coming. "Almost there, buddy," Kevin said between breaths. "Don't move. Just stay." Tao made a low sound, not the distressed moan from before, something softer, an acknowledgement. Kevin covered the last 10 meters in about 4 minutes. His hands were bleeding by the time he pulled himself onto the ledge. It was barely 2 meters wide. To his left, the rock wall. To his right, nothing. Open air and a drop that would kill anything that fell. And there was Tao, right in front of him. Close enough to touch. Kevin knelt down slowly. He extended his hand, palm down, the way he'd done since Tao was a cub. The lion sniffed it. Then Tao pressed his massive head into Kevin's chest. Now, this is where a normal story would give you the happy ending. Man reaches lion, lion is grateful, everyone goes home. But that's not what happened. That's not even close to what happened. Kevin examined Tao's front right leg. The lion had a deep gash above the paw, probably from a sharp rock edge. It was bleeding, and the muscle around it was swollen. Tao could barely put weight on it. Getting the lion to walk back along the ledge to wider ground was going to be a problem. But that wasn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem was the weather. Listen to me carefully. Kevin had checked the forecast that morning, clear skies until noon. But this was the Magaliesberg. These mountains make their own weather. And right now, Kevin could see a dark mass of cloud rolling in from the west, moving fast, and he could feel the temperature dropping. A storm was coming. And when storms hit these cliffs, they bring wind, serious wind, the kind that could knock a man off a ledge, let alone a limping lion. Kevin keyed his radio. "Marius, storm coming in from the west. I need rope. I need the emergency kit from the truck. And I need it up here in the next 20 minutes. Static." Then Marius's voice, "I see it. I'm moving." Kevin turned back to Tao. The lion had lowered himself to the rock, lying on his side, his injured leg extended. His breathing was fast. Too fast. Kevin placed his hand on Tao's ribs and felt the rapid rise and fall. The lion was going into shock. And here's the thing nobody ever talks about with shock in big animals. A lion in shock is unpredictable. Pain responses change, tolerance changes. An animal that trusts you completely can still lash out involuntarily if the pain spikes. Kevin knew this. He knew that every minute on this ledge increased the danger for both of them. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around Tao's injured leg, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Tao flinched, his lips pulled back, exposing canines the length of a man's finger. Kevin didn't pull away. He held the pressure and kept talking. "I know, boy, I know it hurts. Stay with me." The wind picked up. The first fat drops of rain hit the rock around them. Kevin looked west and saw the storm front, a solid wall of dark grey, maybe 10 minutes out. He looked down the cliff face and saw Marius at the base, throwing a coiled rope over his shoulder, starting to climb. Marius was a strong climber, but he was carrying gear, and the rock was getting wetter by the second. Kevin watched him make it 10 meters, then 15, then slip and catch himself, hanging by one arm for a terrifying moment before finding his footing again. "Marius, stop!" Kevin shouted down. "Tie the rope to the scrub pine at the 20-meter mark. I'll come down for it. You can't leave him up there alone. He's not going anywhere on that leg. Tie the rope." True story. Kevin made the calculation in seconds. If Marius fell trying to reach the ledge, Kevin would have an injured lion and an injured ranger. Better to climb down himself, grab the rope, and climb back up. 2 extra climbs on a wet cliff face in a building storm. Simple, right? Marius secured the rope to a twisted pine growing out of a crack in the rock at roughly the 20-meter mark. He attached the emergency kit, a small pack with field bandages, a splint, painkillers, and backed down to the base. Kevin looked at Tao. "I'll be right back. Don't you dare move." The lion blinked at him. Kevin went over the edge of the ledge and started climbing down. The rain was steady now, and the rock was slick and cold. His bleeding fingers screamed against every handhold. He reached the rope in about 6 minutes, untied the kit, slung it over his back, and started climbing back up with the rope coiled over his shoulder. Halfway up, the storm hit. I'm not talking about rain getting heavier. I'm talking about the sky opening up with a violence that turned the cliff face into a waterfall. Wind slammed into the rock from the side, pressing Kevin flat against the granite. Water poured down over his head, blinding him. He couldn't see above, couldn't see below, could only feel the rock under his hands and the terrifying tug of the wind trying to peel him off the mountain. He stopped climbing, pressed his face against the stone, held on. His arms were shaking, his legs were shaking. For the first time in the entire ordeal, Kevin Richardson was scared. Not for Tao, for himself. He was 30 meters up a cliff with no safety equipment in a thunderstorm, and if his fingers slipped, that was it. He hung there for 90 seconds. It felt like 90 years. Then, through the roar of the wind and the water, he heard something, Tao, roaring. Not a distress call this time. A full-throated roar that cut through the storm, deep and primal and impossibly loud, bouncing off the rock walls of the ravine. You want to know what I think? I think that roar was Tao calling him. I think that lion, lying on a narrow ledge with a torn-up leg, heard the storm hit and knew that Kevin was out there on the rock face, and he called out. You can believe what you want. But Kevin heard it, and Kevin started climbing again. He reached the ledge, pulled himself over the edge, collapsed next to Tao, gasping, soaked, shaking. The lion pressed his head against Kevin's side. Kevin put his arm over Tao's neck and lay there in the rain, the two of them huddled on a strip of rock barely wide enough for both of them, with the storm raging around them and 400 feet of nothing at their backs. Now I'm going to tell you what happened next, and I need you to understand that this is the part that became the legend. This is the part people still talk about. Kevin caught his breath. He opened the emergency kit. Working in the rain, with numb fingers, he cleaned Tao's wound, applied field bandages, and gave the lion an injection of painkillers. Tao let him do it. Didn't flinch this time, didn't bare his teeth. Just lay there and let the man who raised him work. Then Kevin rigged the rope. He tied one end around a rock outcropping at the widest point of the ledge, creating a guideline along the shelf back toward the slope, where the terrain was more forgiving. If Tao could walk, even limp, along the ledge while Kevin guided him, they could reach a point where the cliff face angled down into a manageable slope. But here's the problem. Trust me on this. The ledge was wet. The painkillers would take time to kick in. and the storm wasn't letting up. Kevin stood. Tao looked up at him, and Kevin made a decision that every wildlife expert who later reviewed the footage from Marius's phone camera called certifiably insane. He positioned himself on the outside of the ledge, between Tao and the drop. Think about that. He put a 400-pound lion between himself and the rock wall, and he stood on the edge of a cliff in a thunderstorm, so that if Tao stumbled, Kevin would be the barrier between the lion and 400 feet of open air. "Up, Tao," Kevin said. "Come on, up." The lion didn't move. "Tao." "Up. Let's go home." Tao shifted, got his back legs under him, pushed up with his good front leg, wobbled. Kevin braced himself against the lion's shoulder, steadying him. 400 pounds of muscle and bone leaning against a man standing on the edge of oblivion. They started moving, one step at a time. Kevin kept his left hand on the rope, his right hand pressed against Tao's flank, guiding him along the ledge. The rain hammered them, the wind gusted. Every few steps, Tao would pause and sway, and Kevin would plant his feet and push back against the lion's weight, keeping him against the wall, keeping him away from the edge. One step, then another, then another. They covered about 40 meters this way. 40 meters of hell. Kevin's boots slipped 3 times. Each time he caught the rope and held on, and each time he kept his right hand on Tao, because if the lion felt Kevin pull away, Tao might panic. On the 4th slip, Kevin's right foot went completely off the ledge. His leg dropped into open space. For a full second he was hanging by the rope with one hand and pressing against Tao's side with the other, his body half on the ledge and half off it. This is it. This is the moment. Tao stopped. The lion turned his massive head and looked at Kevin, and then, I swear this happened, Tao shifted his weight. He leaned into Kevin, pressed his body against Kevin's torso, and that pressure, that 400 pounds of lion pushing Kevin back toward the wall, gave Kevin the leverage he needed to swing his leg back onto the ledge and find his footing. The lion saved him. Kevin Richardson went up that cliff to save a lion from falling, and the lion saved Kevin from falling, right there on that ledge in the middle of a storm. And Kevin looked at Tao and he saw it. He saw something in that animal's eyes that went beyond instinct, beyond conditioning, beyond anything a textbook could explain. Kevin's throat was tight. He pressed his forehead against Tao's mane, just for a second. Then he straightened up. "All right," he said. "We're even." They kept moving. The ledge widened. The slope began to angle down. The terrain shifted from sheer cliff to rocky hillside, and Kevin could feel the ground becoming more stable under his boots. Tao was limping badly but moving, the painkillers starting to take effect, and the rain was easing, the storm passing east over the mountains. 20 minutes later, they reached the base of the slope. Marius was there, standing next to the truck, soaking wet, eyes wide. He later told a journalist that when he saw Kevin come down that hill with a limping lion pressed against his side, walking together in the rain, he had to sit down on the bumper of the truck because his legs wouldn't hold him. Kevin guided Tao into the back of the truck, a large open bed they used for transporting animals. The lion lay down with a heavy exhale and closed his eyes. Kevin sat down next to him. He didn't say anything for a long time. Marius drove them down the mountain. The vet met them at the main compound. Tao's leg required 12 stitches and a course of antibiotics. No tendon damage, no bone involvement. He'd sliced it on a sharp quartz edge on the rock shelf. A bad cut, painful, but not life-threatening. The real danger had never been the wound. The real danger had been the cliff. Kevin sat on a bench outside the veterinary building while the vet worked on Tao. He looked at his own hands. Torn skin, dried blood, 2 fingernails cracked to the quick. Marius brought him coffee. Kevin took a sip and set it down. "That was the stupidest thing you've ever done," Marius said. Kevin nodded slowly. "Probably. He leaned into you. On the ledge. I saw it through the binoculars before the rain got too heavy. He leaned into you." Kevin picked up the coffee again. "Yeah, he did." "Why?" Kevin looked at Marius. "And here's the thing. Kevin Richardson, the man who'd just free-climbed a cliff in a thunderstorm to save a lion, The man who'd put his body between a predator and a 400-foot drop didn't have a grand speech. He didn't have a scientific explanation. "Because he's my boy," Kevin said. That was it. 5 words. No, hold on. Don't go anywhere yet. Because the story doesn't end on that bench. The next morning, Kevin walked into the recovery enclosure where Tao was resting. The lion was lying on his side, his bandaged leg elevated on a folded blanket the vet had placed there. Kevin opened the gate and walked in, no hesitation, no weapon. No one else in the enclosure. Tao lifted his head. Kevin sat down on the ground about 5 feet away, cross-legged, quiet. He just sat there for about 10 minutes. Nothing happened. Kevin sat. Tao watched him. The morning sun came through the fence and threw long shadows across the enclosure floor. Then Tao got up, slowly, carefully, favoring the leg. He walked to Kevin, and the lion lay down next to him, pressed his full body against Kevin's side, and placed his head in Kevin's lap. Marius was watching from outside the enclosure. He had his phone out. He was recording. And what he captured in that video went everywhere. Millions of views. News networks picked it up. Wildlife organizations shared it. People around the world watched a grown man sitting on the ground with a 400-pound male lion's head in his lap, the man's hand resting gently on the lion's mane, and both of them sitting there in the morning sunlight as if nothing in the world could touch them. But here's the part that doesn't show up in the video. The part only Marius saw. Kevin was crying, not sobbing, not making a sound, just tears running down his face and into Tao's mane. And Kevin let them fall. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't turn from the camera. He just sat there with his lion and let it happen. You know what gets me about this? Kevin Richardson has been criticized his entire career. Animal rights organizations have questioned his methods. Zoologists have called his approach dangerous and irresponsible. Television producers have told him he's one mistake away from a tragedy. And maybe they're right. Maybe what Kevin does is reckless. Maybe one day the statistics will catch up. But on that morning, in that enclosure, a lion who could have killed him with a single swipe chose to lay his head in Kevin's lap. And that's not nothing. That's not reckless. That's something most of us spend our entire lives trying to build with other humans and never quite get there. Trust. Listen, if this story did something for you, if you felt something watching these two on that cliff, hit that subscribe button right now. 1 click. That's all it takes. We tell stories here that you don't hear anywhere else, and I don't want you to miss the next one. Now let me finish this. Tao recovered fully. The leg healed in about 6 weeks. Kevin kept him in the lower enclosure during recovery, visiting every day, sometimes twice. When the bandages came off, and the vet cleared Tao for full activity, Kevin walked the lion back to his territory himself. On foot. No vehicle. Just the two of them walking across the sanctuary grounds, Tao padding along next to Kevin with no leash, no chain, no fence between them, while the other staff watched from a distance. Kevin opened the gate to the upper enclosure. He'd reinforced the fencing, regraded the terrain near the cliff edges, added barriers at the steep sections. The ledge where it all happened was now blocked off by a heavy stone wall that Kevin and his crew had built by hand. Tao walked through the gate. He sniffed the air. He looked back at Kevin once, that long, steady gaze that big cats give you when they're deciding something. Then the lion turned and walked into the grassland, his mane catching the wind, his stride strong and even, no trace of a limp. Kevin watched him go. He leaned against the gatepost and folded his arms. Marius came up beside him. "You think he remembers?" Marius asked. Kevin watched Tao disappear into the tall grass. "Every time I walk into that enclosure, he comes to me, puts his head against my chest. Same spot he pressed into me on that ledge." Kevin paused. "Yeah, he remembers. Here's the thing about what Kevin did. It wasn't about courage. Courage is what you call it when someone runs into a burning building for a stranger. Kevin didn't go up that cliff for a stranger, he went up for family. That changes the calculation completely. It changes what you're willing to risk. It changes what your body will do when your mind is telling you to stop. And what Tao did on that ledge, shifting his weight, pressing into Kevin, keeping him from going over the edge. That wasn't trained behavior. Nobody teaches a lion to brace a human on a cliff. That was something else entirely. Call it instinct, call it bond, call it whatever you want. But I've watched that phone footage from Marius's camera more times than I can count, and what I see is an animal making a choice to protect the person who was protecting him. Kevin still works at the sanctuary. Tao is still there. They still walk together. Kevin still lies down next to Tao in the grass, still wraps his arms around that massive neck, still puts his face against that mane. And every time he does it, he's betting his life on a relationship that most of the world says shouldn't exist. The cliff is still there too. You can see it from the main compound if you know where to look. A grey rock face with a narrow ledge cutting across it, now blocked by a stone wall, with scrub pines growing out of the cracks and the wind coming up from the ravine below. Marius told me that sometimes, early in the morning, he'll find Kevin standing at the fence line, looking up at that cliff, not moving, just looking. And if you ask him what he's thinking about, he'll shake his head and walk away. But Marius knows. And now you know. A man climbed a cliff in a thunderstorm to save a lion, and the lion saved him right back. On a strip of wet rock 40 meters above the ground, in the howling wind and the rain, a human being and a wild animal kept each other alive through nothing but trust and 400 pounds of pressure leaning in the right direction. That's the legend. That's what they whisper about in the Magaliesberg. That's what the rangers tell new volunteers around the fire when the night gets quiet and the lions start roaring in the distance. 2 souls on a ledge, 1 choice. And a bond that held when the rock didn't.